He stood in my kitchen, holding a half-packed bag and her silence. I just think after 2 years together, maybe it's better if we're strangers. My son didn't stutter. His voice didn't shake. Mine did. But I didn't argue. Didn't plead. Didn't ask for one more dinner or one more Sunday drive. I just turned back toward the pot of coffee that had gone cold. My name is Walter Grant. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because if you've ever poured everything into someone, your meals, your words, your quiet loyalty, and still been reduced to a line like that, then you understand. 2 years. She was my son's partner. She came in like spring, rearranged the furniture, changed his diet, called me dad, when her real one never did. I built a home with 2 extra chairs on the porch because she liked the evening breeze. And in the end, she said she wanted silence, distance, to be strangers. So that's what I gave her. I didn't ask why. Didn't fight for my place. I just removed myself from her version of a story. Quietly, respectfully, like a man who had been forgotten long before he was dismissed. But something inside me changed. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a door unlocking behind you. And the story she thought was over? It hadn't even begun. I didn't tell anyone. Not the neighbors who used to see her watering my tomatoes. Not the church ladies who asked, "How's that sweet girl of your son's?" Not even my oldest friend, Hank, who always saw through my silences. I just nodded and said, "She's good," and poured the lemonade anyway. But I noticed things, like how her voice never came through the hallway anymore. How the front door stayed closed on weekends. How the space she took up for 2 years slowly dissolved into nothing, like she was never there to begin with. And I would have let that be the end of it, until the day her best friend, Claire, knocked on my door. She had brought me homemade peach pie. Said she baked too much. But when I opened the door, she didn't say hi. She said, "You look lonelier than usual." And I paused, because there was no pity in her eyes. No fake sympathy. Just honesty, the kind that makes you stand up straighter, even if you're tired. So we sat, ate pie on the porch, talked about things that didn't matter, recipes, grocery prices, how loud the birds had gotten this spring. She didn't bring up my son, didn't bring up her friend. But in the silence between sentences, I heard everything she didn't say. And then, before she left, she said something I'll never forget. "You were the only good thing she had." And she threw that away before she knew what it was worth. That night I didn't sleep, not out of regret, but because for the first time in months, I felt seen. And I realized something about grief no one ever tells you. Sometimes it doesn't come with tears. Sometimes it shows up dressed as dignity and knocks back with pie. The weeks passed slowly after that. Claire stopped by again, then again, never for long, and never with expectations. Once with cookies. Once just to return a book she borrowed 5 years ago and never read anyway. Once she sat beside me without saying a word, just watched the wind move through the trees like it was enough. She didn't ask me questions I didn't want to answer. Didn't speak about my son. Didn't mention the woman who used to call me Dad like it was a part she was playing. And maybe that's why I began to breathe again. You see, when someone hurts you quietly, the world doesn't notice. There's no scene, no broken plates, no headlines. Just an old man left setting the table for one less person. But when someone walks in gently, with no plan but presence, you begin to realize just how empty things had gotten. Claire never tried to fill the space. She just refused to ignore it. One evening, while watering the porch plants, I saw a familiar car slow down across the street. It was her, not Claire. Her. The one who once held my son's hand like he was her future. The one who said, "Let's just be strangers," like it was a casual suggestion. She didn't wave, didn't step out, just stared from behind the wheel for a moment, like she was checking on a grave she didn't want to admit she dug. And I nodded once, calm, turned back to the flowers, didn't flinch, because I'd learned something in those silent months. When someone chooses to become a stranger to you, the most powerful thing you can do is let them, completely. And when Claire showed up the next morning with coffee instead of pie, I realized I had done exactly that. Claire started leaving little notes tucked inside the newspaper she'd drop off. Not romantic, not yet. Just kind. One read, "You still have more to give. Don't shrink." Another, "Your quiet is louder than most people shouting." And my favorite, "Don't confuse being left with being finished." She had a way of seeing the ache in people without making them feel exposed. Like sunlight through a curtain, soft, but certain. And one afternoon, while trimming the hedges, I said it out loud for the first time. I don't miss her. I miss who I thought she was. Claire didn't nod or comfort me. She just said, "Good. That means you're healing." You see, heartbreak is never about the person. It's about the version of them you created. The version that fit in your world. When my son brought her home 2 years ago, I thought maybe I'd have someone to laugh with, to eat with, to talk to while he worked late. Someone who reminded me I was still needed. But the truth is, she didn't want a second father. She wanted a witness. And when I stopped clapping for her, she left. Claire sat beside me without applause. She didn't need a show. She just needed truth. And truth came slowly, like a sunrise behind clouds. One morning, I heard from my son. First time in months. His voice was dry, unsure. "Hey, Dad. Just checking in. You okay?" I paused and said something that surprised even me. "I'm doing better than ever." He didn't ask why. Didn't ask who. But I could hear the silence tighten around him, like maybe he already knew. Because sometimes when someone says, "Let's be strangers," what they really mean is, "Let's stay close, but only on my terms." And I was no longer living on rented ground. It was a Sunday afternoon when Claire asked if I'd like to join her for lunch in town. Nothing fancy, just a quiet booth at a diner that still served pot roast the old way and called coffee refills on the house. I said yes. Not because I was lonely, but because I wasn't anymore. We talked about things people forget how to talk about. How the sky changes color before it rains. How songs from the 60s still hold up. How growing older doesn't mean you stop needing connection. It just means you value presence more than promises. When we walked back to the car, Claire hesitated. "Would it be all right if I stopped by tomorrow?" she asked softly. I looked at her, really looked. Her hands folded, her eyes calm. No rush, no pressure. And I smiled. "You're already welcome," I said. No need to ask. That evening, while sitting on my porch with the fading sun on my chest, I saw that same familiar car pass again. Slower this time. She was driving. Alone. Our eyes met just briefly, and she saw Claire's sweater hanging on the back of my porch chair. She saw the second coffee mug. She saw that the space she once left behind had not stayed empty. She didn't wave, didn't honk, just kept driving. But something in her face cracked for a split second. That look when someone realizes they were never irreplaceable, just temporary. And I took a sip of warm coffee. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness or proving a point. It's rebuilding your peace so fully that the person who let it collapse has to watch it rise without them. That night, Claire texted, "Thank you for letting me in." I replied, "Thank you for knocking," when others only walked away. The next week, my son showed up. Unannounced. Uncertain. He stood by my porch like he hadn't spent months forgetting I existed. Hands in his jacket, eyes scanning the floorboards, the trees, everything but me. "Dad, I heard you've been spending time with Claire." I leaned back in my chair. Calm. Quiet. And he hesitated. "I just thought maybe you'd, I don't know, give time." I looked at him, then really looked. Not as my boy, but as a man who had watched me grieve quietly and never asked why. A man who stood beside a woman for 2 years and never noticed how she erased me with a smile. She said we should be strangers, I replied. You didn't object. She didn't mean. I raised a hand. Just once. She meant it. And I honored it. I gave her exactly what she asked for. The silence between us stretched thin. Then he said something I didn't expect. She cries about you. Says she made a mistake. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because by the time some people realize what they lost. You've already rebuilt the part of yourself they were holding. I don't hate her, I said. My son looked up. I just don't owe her anything anymore. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding behind those tired eyes. She's coming over tomorrow, he muttered, to apologize. I didn't say yes. Didn't say no. I just said, she may find a different man waiting here than the one she remembers. Because grief turns to growth when no one's watching. And sometimes the person you hurt the most is the one who changes in your absence. The next day, I cleaned the porch, set out 2 chairs, but only 1 cup. She arrived just after noon. Same car, same walk, but not the same woman. There was hesitation in her steps now, a kind of weight behind her smile, like someone who's finally felt what silence tastes like when it's not on their terms. I opened the door slowly. She smiled, soft and unsure. Hi. I nodded. Afternoon. She looked past me, at the porch, the flowers, the empty chair. Everything looks the same, she said. No, I replied. It doesn't. You just remember it that way. She lowered her eyes, holding something in her hand, a small envelope. I just wanted to say sorry. For how I left. For how I made you feel invisible. I took the envelope, but didn't open it. You didn't make me invisible, I said. You just helped me see who was really looking. She looked up then, eyes already watering. I didn't know you'd move on. With Claire. I smiled. Not out of spite. Just peace. You asked to be a stranger, so I treated you like one. And strangers don't get to decide what happens after they walk away. She was silent. The wind moved between us like a careful pause. She glanced at the empty cup on the table. I always thought you'd wait. I did, I said. Until I didn't have to anymore. Claire pulled up a few minutes later, unaware, but not uninvited. She stepped out with 2 bags of groceries and a tired smile meant just for me. The woman standing beside me turned to go. No drama. No scene. Just a slow, quiet turning, the way strangers part at a crosswalk. And as she reached her car, I finally opened the envelope. It was a photograph. One I'd taken during a cookout 2 summers ago. She had written on the back, "Thank you for being the only one who saw me." I placed it on the table, poured Claire a cup of coffee, and said nothing. Because sometimes the loudest closure is found in someone else's silence. That evening, the sun lingered longer than usual. Claire and I sat on the porch, sipping coffee as the light stretched across the lawn like it didn't want to say goodbye. She noticed the envelope on the table. From her, she asked. I nodded, handed it to her. She read the message on the back of the photo. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then she looked at me with that quiet steadiness I'd come to count on. You don't have to carry it anymore, you know. And for once, I believed that. It wasn't forgiveness I needed. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition that I hadn't been crazy, that the hurt had been real, that the absence meant something. But more than that I had rebuilt, not out of spite, out of strength. Later that night, as Claire cleaned up the cups and I closed the front gate, my phone buzzed. A message for my son. Just 3 words. You were right. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from that sentence. I had already found what mattered, someone who didn't walk in needing me to be less so they could feel more. Claire came out with a blanket and sat beside me. You good? She asked. I nodded. Because sometimes justice isn't about winning. It's about not letting someone's goodbye define your worth. She squeezed my hand, and in that moment I realized the porch no longer felt like a memory. It felt like a beginning, and the man who had once been asked to be a stranger had finally come home to himself.